you even talk to some of the Democratic leaders over there, they're not as confident as most political analysts are that they are going to maintain that seat. I talked to one who broke down like who the ninth vote. The Republicans have to swing 9 seats in this election, and they could break down and say, there's our ninth seat. And you said, oh, that's not out of reach.
So somewhere in your kitchen, underneath some junk mail or a bill, is a ballot to talk about, well, kind of what's everything on that ballot. Ed Sealover from the Denver Business Journal. You still working for that rag?
I still am, yes.
How long has it been now?
But I've been there for 13 years now. And
right from the Rocky, right?
Right from the Rocky, right from the dearly departed Rocky Mountain News.
Right when the Rocky went under.
I got a week break between the Rocky going under and me starting.
Which makes you one of the luckiest journalists in Denver at the time to actually.
It was. True story. My 2 closest friends found jobs, one in Australia, one in South Korea. I got to stay here in Denver. And so,
wow.
I'm
sorry you lost that.
To this political
sorry
thing,
you lost that bet there. Now, Denver Business Journal has really come on political reporting over the years too. I think a lot of that has to do with you.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that. We try to watch.
It's not good reporting. I just don't want to. But there's.
Why did I come on?
I have no idea because I give you beer. That's why.
Oh yes.
Actually, it is interesting because you guys do a certain amount of free reporting. But you got to get in there. And I think that a lot of business journals around the country kind of cater to the office community. Who's going where and who got hired where. But the Denver Business Journal actually does real reporting on the politics and what's going on in the companies, what's going on in the business environment, and particularly around elections. So it's another important voice we have, particularly now that we don't have as many newspaper voices as we used to.
Absolutely. Thank you. And yes, our attitude is we try to focus things that are squarely hitting the business community and focus on, even when we're doing the big picture, like a U.S. Senate race, focus on the business issues at play and what's going to come out of it.
Well, let's start off with that one. So this is a competitive U.S. Senate race.
Absolutely.
And it's about frickin' time that we had one. So I believe Michael Bennet to be the accidental senator. This guy has had a charmed life because Republicans have never really put up a candidate against him that could win. It's just been a comedy of errors. This time's a little different in that Joe O'Dea is an unusual candidate, particularly on the hot issue that Democrats are hoping for, which is the abortion issue. He's kind of silenced that issue. If you know the issue, he is a moderately pro-choice guy. I don't see how they're going to land too many punches on him on this.
Well, no, they're going to keep trying, though. I mean, that is a message that I think every Democrat across the country is beating on right now. It is the idea that choice is at issue on the ballot in every race involving the federal government, in every race involving the state government. Hell, we saw a recent poll that showed that's a hot idea in Denver and what's going to factor in the Denver mayor's race, even though the Denver mayor's office has nothing to do with abortion. So I think you're going to keep seeing those messages, but I think you're going to see a lot of other messaging, too, and especially
way back when I was on the RTD board, I remember questionnaires coming as a candidate about abortion. And I was very, very clear. I do not support abortion on RTD buses. I made it very clear. But it's just ridiculous what people think government officials can do on a particular issue.
Well, I mean, it's clear it's an important issue to a percentage of the population. I mean, and I should say percentage of population on both sides of the issue. But I think what's often forgotten about, and especially when you look at the results of, say, the Kansas midterm election this year, where the abortion restrictions were defeated, is that when the full scale of options of issues are on a ballot, people are going to think about other things too. And I think that's one thing that we're really seeing in the Senate race is O'Dea is trying to get out there and he's trying to say, okay, great, there's that. Let's talk about the other things here. Let's talk about
inflation. Is he succeeding in that?
I think you see him cutting through a little bit. I mean, you've seen a lot of articles out there, and I'm not one of those who's writing anything about abortion, but you see a lot of articles out there, and people are writing about abortion in the Senate race. But I think you see more articles about issues other than abortion. So in that way, yes. And I think in some way, Bennett wants to talk about some other things too.
What does he want to talk about?
I think he wants to talk about his 14 years in office and what he's done. I mean, you see a lot of Bennett helped to bring in this funding, Bennett helped to bring in that funding.
But he also passed a lot of things that were very bad for the Denver business community, I would think, including a lot of debt spending and a lot of inflationary policies, at least from my point of view. Generally speaking, the business community, I would assume, would support a candidate like O'Day over Bennett, all other things being equal.
There are no specific polls that say, you in the business community, who do you support here? O'Day brings a very interesting background in that he is a businessman. He doesn't have a single record of a vote to run on. He has never cast a vote in office before. There is some lean among business folks, even where somebody sits differently on the spectrum than them, that they're going to say, oh, I appreciate that person, certainly. But I think you're going to look at the issues in totem here. I mean, businesses care about what's coming out of Washington. They care the regulations that are coming out of Washington. They care some of the funding that's coming out of Washington. I mean, O'Day's in an interesting spot here. He came out early in support of the transportation infrastructure funding bill. His company is one that works with transportation money. There are a lot of businesses around Colorado that need that to grow too. So yeah, there are certainly issues where businesses say, I don't like what Bennett did with this. There are others who say, well, I'm glad he supported this. There is money we needed brought back to us. But the question is going to be his record of 14 years versus here's this guy who doesn't have any record. How much am I going to jump behind him because he's one of us?
In a year where the issues are the economy, inflation, and crime, and it being a midterm election, everything points to this should be a great year for Republicans. I think the only thing that pushes back the other way are some of the social issues, abortion being top. I gotta think if there was ever a year for a Republican to win this seat, it's got to be this year.
This is a good year. I mean, let's not forget, I think in 2010, that was a very, very good Republican year, and Ken Buck was unable to capture the seat that year. I think this certainly is. I mean, you've seen polls that are all over the place. There's one that said it's a 1-point race at this point. There's others that said it's a 10-point race. The most important number that intrigues me, just as a political analyst looking at this, is the number of polls I saw, particularly around August and early September, that said that somewhere between 20 and 24% of voters did not have an opinion of Michael Bennett, a man who is running, and if he is elected again, will be in position to be the longest-serving senator in the state's history, has not formed an opinion on the general public.
Not only that, a man who ran for United States president, and still so many people here don't know of him. And I think that speaks to kind of his personality, in that he comes across as a Yale, aloof kind of guy. In my mind, Thurston Howell III could play him in the movie. You're too young to remember Thurston Howell III.
I remember Gilligan's Island, but
you just remember Ginger. That's all you remember. I'm getting to the age where Mrs. Howell's starting to look pretty hot to me. So, but that's a me issue. So I'm not too sure which way this rolls, but I think it's going to be within a percentage point in either direction.
I think it's going to be close. I mean, I think that big amount of people that don't have an opinion of Bennett means two things. One, that O'Day can still move in and define Bennett in some ways with an aggressive advertising campaign. But two, that Bennett also doesn't start out with the flat-out negatives that some people are going to have who are known better. So it's really going to be a question of how do the candidates define each other, and in the end, what does it come down to?
Anyone from Biden's party is going to be a negative walking in. And mind you, if it was a Republican president and we were having economic troubles and all that, then it would be the same thing. It's what you see every midterm. So there's going to be a natural confluence there. Talk to me a little bit about the 8th. That's also the seat I'm very interested in. I think Barbara Kirkmeyer is doing an incredible job there, but I don't know how to read that district either. The newly created 8th Congressional District.
8th Congressional District, newly created this year, features State Senator Barbara Kirkmeyer, a Republican, running against State Representative Yadira Caraveo, a Democrat. And, I mean, that's one where the polls have swung all the way from maybe Kirkmeyer's up 4 points to maybe she's up half a point. I mean, that is going to be really coming down to the very end. It's been an interesting, and I will say, as an analyst, a little bit of a disappointing race. I thought this was, of all the races in Colorado, the one that would come down to local issues the most. I mean, this is a district that is defined by growth. This is created because there's such growth up the I-25 corridor in that direction. We haven't seen a lot of talk about housing. We haven't seen talk about the federal government's role in growth. And at the same point, this is also a district that is defined by the oil and gas industry about whether or not there should be more curbs on it or whether or not it should be allowed to flourish out there. And we've seen very little discussion of that.
It's also different in that Denver is a very progressive district. Boulder is a very elitist progressive district. This new district, while it has some Democratic leanings, is a bit more, I don't want to say like Pueblo, but there's a lot of working class roots there. It's not your traditional Boulder Democrat. These are guys who worked in factories. These are guys who work in businesses. This is a lot of labor Democrats as well. And that's not today's Democrat Party as much as it was in years past.
Absolutely. I mean, that's something, and I'm sure we'll get into this later, something that we're finding even in the contest for State Senate District 3 in Pueblo right now, that the issues are far different than they used to be. It's also not just, a working class Democratic district. It's a district of a lot of people who fled, for lack of a better word, the Denver area or the Boulder area, that they've moved somewhere in between and that they've chosen to get away from the bigger areas where sometimes local politics and national politics blend too much. Yet what we're seeing right now is a lot of talk about the economy, which is a key issue, and about abortion, and nothing that says, but the people of this newly drawn district who are going to have their own voice standing out for the first time need to hear this. That's what I'm a little surprised at. If that's the case, you have to, again, give the edge to Kirkmeyer because this is going to be a year when Republicans have that little bit of a wave going for them.
Also, it goes into Weld County. And Weld County is a Republican stronghold. It's an oil and gas area as well. That's going to be do well for Kirkmeyer as well. Let's talk about Colorado. My battleground is the state of Colorado. Odds are that Governor Polis wins re-election. He's got the money. He's got the name recognition. For some reason, he's very popular. Even though we have the highest state inflation rate by the Congressional Budget Office at 15.4%, just mind-boggling. Even though businesses are overregulated in a way I've never seen in my 5 decades in Colorado, it's just amazing. Does Heidi have a shot at winning this race?
It's hard to see where that comes from at this point.
Why do you say that?
Here, I mean, you look at the polls, and again, you've seen this great derivation in races like the U.S. Senate or the 7th Congressional District. The polls here show consistently it's between a 12 and 17-point advantage for Polis right now. You mentioned he's got the money. You've mentioned he's appealed to some people in the middle. And I know you are not a fan of Governor Jared Polis, but let's remember Polis had the highest rating among all Democratic governors in several studies I saw for his pandemic response and not overburdening the economy, even higher than some. I see you laughing, but I'm saying these are outside sources who looked at this and said, you did better than some Republicans.
You take out the ones that his friend and board member, employee, Art Laffer, is involved in. Pull those outside, and it tells quite a different story.
Certainly.
All right, so what bothers me the most about Jared, who I find to be an intriguing guy, is that he knows better. And what I find so frustrating is this duplicitous, slick, Bill Clinton-esque quality that he wants to be everything to everybody. So depending on who he's in front of, he talks that language, and he's politically fast. Unlike his 2 Democratic predecessors, who were not that fast on policy. This guy floats like a butterfly, and he knows it. But to take credit for a Tabor refund that he wanted to destroy with Prop CC and say it's the Colorado cash back or whatever, and put his name on it, you know better than that. To write this letter to the EPA saying he's deeply opposed to being forced to reformulate gasoline here when he is the sole reason that's happening. He rescinded the request for a waiver that Hickenlooper put in that was granted every time any governor has done it. It's that kind of stuff that makes you really just personally disappointed that here's a guy who does one thing, says the other, and more so than a regular politician. It's that really smarmy, two-faced thing that I'm amazed that people buy it. And we're looking at a state that now has the highest inflation rate. We're seeing a state that's being enveloped by crime, and still he's doing so well because people seem to like his personality.
They also don't tie him directly to the crime. I think you're going to see that a little bit more in the legislative races. That, there was this law passed that Polis swooped in at the end and signed, but never was a big proponent of it.
He still signed it.
He still did sign it. You're absolutely.
We have the second highest death rate from fentanyl from the law he signed.
And the highest auto theft rate, not because of the law he signed, but that's something that people are going to remember too. And in some ways, people do see the things he does and say, well, but he goes one way this way. What you're saying is duplicitous. Some people might say, oh, he splits the baby on this one.
No, there's no splitting the baby when you rescind the application to the EPA for a waiver on ozone, and then you say, I'm deeply opposed to what I just caused to happen. You cannot have it both ways. You cannot say, I'm giving you your money back, but if I had it my way, you'd never get a penny back in TABOR refunds ever. That is insulting in such a deep and fundamental way. That's what I find really awful about this. And I find also that so many of these regulations that his administration is promulgating going to take years to really start kicking in. And now that, for instance, the Air Quality Control Commission is now going to be more powerful than the Public Utilities Commission.
Technically, I think you mean the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission.
No, I do not, which is also powerful. No, the Air Quality Control Commission now has powers very much like the PUC, in that they can start putting in regulations of requiring employers to track how their employees get to work. Just really crazy ass stuff that will be coming in a second term. I'm concerned about that and what it's going to take years later.
I mean, true. I'm going to focus on that issue that you just brought up there, because I think it's a good way to show. And I'm just sitting here not to defend or oppose these policies, but to show why he may be more popular. Polis is the same person who pushed forward the idea in 2021 of, hey, let's make big employers cut down on the miles that their employees drive. And then Polis was the one that came in and said, forget it, we're not going forward with this. So he managed...
Until after my reelection.
Right. Well...
It's kind of like, this is a guy who raised taxes by calling them fees, and then has the unmitigated gall, a phrase I've always wanted to use, unmitigated gall to say, I'm going to save you money by holding off one of my taxes until after I'm reelected, and then my gas tax will ride back in. Come on, that's ugly. Man up and say, I am responsible for the gas tax. I believe it's important, and here's why. I'm responsible for the 30 to 50 cent a gallon refueling charge that we're going to have from the EPA because it was my sole decision. It was the right decision, and here's why. That's what leadership is. That's not what we're getting. We're getting somebody who wants to be everything to everybody, and that's the opposite.
And I think I've heard more from you about this in the last 7 minutes here than I've heard from his Republican opponent about some of these issues. And maybe that explains why he's 17 points up in the polls right now.
Maybe. She did a great job of the debate down in Pueblo a couple weeks back. Too bad it wasn't aired everywhere. So I think she's missed some opportunities. Go down to some of these other races. AG race. This is also another big constitutional race. Kellner is, I don't know how to trust polls when they start, the smaller the world gets.
You're right.
But I think that's also could be a tougher race for Weiser. How do you read it?
I think if you're ranking, and the way I would look at it, if you're ranking the 4 statewide races, I think Polis is the most likely to get reelected, and I think Weiser's probably second. I think once you get down to Secretary of State and Treasurer, those might be legitimately hard offices for the Democrats to hold in a Republican-leaning year this year.
By the way, it should worth noting, used to be in Colorado that voters would split those tickets quite often. Vote for the Republican senator, but a Democratic governor or a Democratic
Which
governor.
is what happened in 2014,
Right.
for example.
But,
yes,
but it hasn't happened as often recently. But maybe this is one of those years.
The question will be, how big a name is Phil Weiser? I don't think we can ask how big a name is John Kellner. He's not that well known. He's been in office a couple of years. He doesn't have a huge amount of detractors, but doesn't have a huge amount of name recognition either. And 4 years ago, Weiser beat somebody who had a ton of name recognition. George Brockler was the most well-known DA in the state, and he did it on the back of a Democratic wave year. Yeah. Weiser has gained more name recognition. He has an awful lot of money. He's been up on the airwaves. He's been in mailboxes, much more so than Kellner has now. And he's also gotten a few Republicans to come out and say, I actually like working with Phil Weiser. So I don't know how much that means to the average voter. I mean, there were people last year who expected Weiser couldn't beat Brockler even in a Democratic year, and yet he did. Is he got enough name recognition where he can stay with the office? Or is he going to go with the tides? Are people going to link the AG's office to the fentanyl crisis and to the crime crisis, or are they going to blame more at the politicians who passed the laws that the AG's office just now has some oversight over? So, yes, that's a long way of saying I don't know. This is going to be a particularly interesting race to see how closely people are paying attention to this office and what it means to them.
Jenna Griswold is a very ambitious woman. She's got her sights, I think, on U.S. Senate at some point, and she's used her Secretary of State's position for all sorts of things. I do agree with you that if there's a couple of seats to switch, Treasurer, Secretary of State might be it. I don't know what the wave is. If there's a wave, Young and Jenna, I think they lose.
You know, it's an interesting idea.
Let me put it this way. Other than governor, those other three seats largely are reactionary seats to what else is going on in the world.
Unless they had a big name, like when Mike Kaufman served in one of those offices. I think that's particularly true of the treasurer's race. I covered both Lang Sias and Dave Young for many years at the Capitol. I'm willing to bet 75% of Coloradans could not identify either of them if they were standing in front of them now. I think the treasurer's race will just tell you what the generic ballot says this year. I think Jenna Griswold is an interesting one because she has garnered a lot of attention. Sometimes they're good things, sometimes they're unpopular things. Suggesting, for example, that we're close to losing our right to vote nationally. I think in the same way that Polis's midline popularity will work for him, I think hers might work against her. I think she has been caught in too many controversies over her 4 years. And maybe the secretary, I'll go back to 2018 and say Wayne Williams, who was nationally lauded as one of the best secretaries of state in the country, did not get any benefit of the doubt from the voters for what he did in that office. If she has maintained safe elections here, I don't know that she's getting any benefit of that doubt either. And people may think of her and the controversies more than her and what her name isn't associated with.
Talk about the power of the atmosphere in which you run. Wayne Williams ran in a Democratic year and lost, even though, power to the press, he was endorsed by every single newspaper in Colorado, sans one, the Boulder Weekly, which is an alternative socialist weekly. So you won every endorsement, every single endorsement, and you still lost. It tells you what the power of a wave is. Let's get to the state senate.
Okay.
This is where I think a lot of Republicans are putting all their chips, which is, can we win back the Senate? With Priola's
defection.
Let's just say coming out of the closet. It gets a little tougher.
Significantly tougher.
I talked to some Republicans, and now mind you, they have to be positive about it, but they say, no, we can do this. I think we're going to win even without Priola. I don't know. I think it's going to be tough. I think they can win if they can then recall Priola. I'm not certain if they're going to be able to do it with that. You tell me, what are the swing seats?
Okay, so here's the math for those who don't follow this as closely as John and I do. Democrats hold a 21-14 edge in the Senate right now. There are 7 seats that are considered competitive. Republicans have to win 4 of those 7 seats. Here's the trick. Democrats hold 5 seats, so they have an opportunity not just to go in and win, but not have to win every one of those seats. The trick is one of the seats they are holding is a vastly different seat in Northwest Colorado than the one they won 4 years ago, and where the voter advantage now swings toward the Democrats. So you're going to see this come down to seats such as Senate District 3 in Pueblo, traditionally a very safe Democratic seat. Pueblo is an area that is changing at this point. Senator Nick Hendrickson was appointed. He doesn't have the benefit of having run a big campaign like this before. I think that one is going to be very close. You've got a seat in...
Keep in mind, Pueblo voted for Donald Trump. First time they voted for a Republican in 50 years, Brian. That was 2016.
2016, and then it switched back. So you really don't know where Pueblo's going to go now. It really is one of the great new swing areas in the state. You've got a seat, the one I mentioned before, in Northwest Colorado that technically has been Senator Bob Rankin's seat. Rankin was moved to a different district. Now Representative Dylan Roberts is running for that seat. He's got a lot of money coming in. He's got a lot of... he's got a voter advantage up there. That's one the Democrats expect to flip at this point. It will be competitive, mind you, but that's one they like their chances on. You've got a seat such as one in, get my directions right here, southeast Arapahoe County in the Centennial area, where Representative Tom Sullivan, known very well for his gun control advocacy, is running for an open seat in that area. That's about a 50-50 toss-up, most people say at this point. You got a seat in the heart of El Paso County, and people may say, oh, gosh, that's got to go Republican. But it's a seat that's been drawn very well for the Democrats. This is John Morse's old seat. This is a seat that Pete Lee held for the past 4 years. A seat that that really is such, I would say, that it's been drawn a little bit more even this year. But you've got Senator Dennis Heisey, moved from a different district, Republican Tony Exum, well-known down there. That's another one where nobody really knows what's going to happen. So the chances are, yes, the Republicans could win this, but it's going to be that much harder. And if it comes down to, say, 18-17, the Democrats are up on election night, and then you've got the Kevin Priola recall coming up, what are the chances Priola doesn't resign that seat to keep that in Democratic hands? I mean, so, I think a lot of people would think that's a political fantasy. Let's have the entire fate of the legislature rest on a recall, but I don't think that's going to come down to that. But Republicans are going to have to win this or lose this on election night, and it's not going to be easy to win that many seats.
Real fast.
Yes.
The House.
The House.
I think Republicans make substantial gains. I have a hard time seeing a takeover there. Talk to the minority leader there, Hugh McKean. He'll say something very different.
And you even talk to some of the Democratic leaders over there. They're not as confident as most political analysts are that they are going to maintain that seat. I talked to one who broke down like who the ninth vote. Republicans have to swing 9 seats in this election, and they could break down and say, "There's our 9th seat," and you said, "Oh, that's not out of reach." But I think the trick here is it's going to be hard to flip that many seats. But if Republicans, who are now down 41-24 in that House, can get it within 34-31, even 35-30, there are a number of issues where they will have a chance at defeating Democratic bills. Business folks, for example, are looking at this and they see moderate Democratic representatives like Shannon Byrd and Mark Snyder on business issues and say, well, if you can get it down to 34-31, all of a sudden some of these regulations have less of a chance of getting through. I don't know on gun rights, a big issue for you, that's going to make a difference. I think you got to hope for a full Republican takeover for that. But yes.
And
even then, yes. But narrowing the margin is certainly a possibility, and I think you'll see a lot more moderation and negotiation coming out of that House if the margin gets down to 3 to 5 seat difference.
Let's do this as fast as possible. Always fun things on the ballot, which are put on by guys like me or by the legislature. Guys like me put it on, it costs a lot of money. Guys over there, they just go, let's put something on the ballot, and that costs them nothing. What do you see, other than, of course, the income tax reduction that I've got on the ballot, the most important thing you've ever reported on?
Yes, clearly. What do I see as being important? I think the three liquor measures are ones that people are going to be talking about, are already talking about. The ability to have.
Do you think they all pass or all fail?
There are a lot of people that are saying they think it's all going to pass. These are, in some ways, populist issues. Hey, consumers, would you like to get liquor easier? Well, hell yeah, I'd like to get liquor easier. So they stand a good chance. They are heavily financially backed as well. You never know. Coloradans would surprise before. I think the one that's going to be closer is, are Coloradans ready to legalize psychedelic mushrooms? We would be the second state in America that would do that if that is passed this year, only behind Oregon.
I'm going to go out on a limb. I'm going to say it's going to fail. I think it's going to fail, and if only crime in Colorado was not as rampant, and if the homeless transient issue wasn't so ugly and awful, it might. But right now, I think people are like, I can't take it anymore.
You've seen polls. I've seen one poll that said, hey, this actually is a decent chance of passing, but it's one of those where I think people will think about it, say, I'll pass this, go into the booth and sit down there and stare and say, or I guess sit down at their kitchen table and vote and say, psychedelic mushrooms, am I really ready to legalize those? Mind you, this is not going to be like marijuana. You can walk in any store in any corner, buy some marijuana. This is going to have to be being treated by someone who's licensed through a natural healing center is what they're called, which is probably going to be pricey and mean that only, people who are a little wealthier can actually use psychedelic mushrooms if this passes. But I think it will say a lot, and I think it will have a national focus on it if this actually does pass.
Last question. You're on a deserted island. You're going to spend the rest of your life there. Up comes on shore a big shipping container full of craft beer. You can only have that one craft beer for the rest of your life. What's it going to be?
That's really hard because I like jumping around between craft beers.
Because people should know Mr. Sealover is an expert on craft beers and written books and articles and one of the greats on it. So I need to know. And you missed this one. I want to make it clear.
Technically, this is not a craft beer, but I think if I had to do one right now, the one I've been drinking over and over is In the Steep. It is a hazy IPA from Outer Range Brewing of Frisco. It is
In the Steep.
Yes, it's a snow analogy.
Are you worried that if all these beer or these liquor laws pass, you will be able to buy your fancy pants local brews?
The breweries actually haven't gotten involved in these issues so much this year. This is a fight between liquor stores wanting all of these to fail, despite one of the issues being one that says, can liquor stores expand to more locations? But that's basically being paid for by Total Wine and More, a Maryland-based company who goes against the rest of the liquor store industry here. But no, breweries don't think at this point they're worried anymore. It's about liquor stores and whether or not they will be open or whether you'll see more of them closing.
What's the difference
we
between
did not see in recent years?
The difference between a hazy IPA, did you say?
Yes, a hazy IPA is
an IPA.
A little cloudier than a regular IPA, and it's got more of a kind of a tropical fruit flavor than a piney bitterness.
So let's leave it at this. Despite you being a subpar reporter and a questionable person, we can agree. We can agree
that I should have been somewhere else the last half hour.
Indeed. But we could also agree fruit should not be brewed in beer.
I agree, and that's the wonderful thing about hazy IPAs. There is no fruit in beer. It just brings out certain tropical characteristics of the hops that makes it more refreshing.
Are you really allergic to fruit in beer, or are you just...
I really am, actually. I've had a couple reactions to beers made with fruit, so I cannot drink fruit in beer.
That wasn't just the anabuse kicking in?
I don't know. It's all hazy in my memory.
Ed, as always, thanks so much.
Thank you. I appreciate coming on.
Cheers. If you enjoyed that conversation, by all means, click one of these other great programs. We have the best conversations with the most fascinating Coloradans. And subscribe to our channel. Just click down below and hit that little bell button, too. You don't want to miss a single show.